sınıf 2. dönem öğrencisiyim. Platform of Politics ile bu dönem bir collaboration yapmak istedim ve Emre Hoca'yla, Emre Hoca'yı getirdik. Sağ olsun geldi. Çok teşekkür ederim.
Hello everyone, my name is Eren. I'm a third year economics student. I represent the Platform of Politics, and today we organize a joint event with Economics Research Union. And today we will talk about Türkiye-China Economic Relations. And thank you everyone for joining the event.
Okay, I guess the floor is mine. Hello everyone, I mean many of you are or were my students, so you know me very well. So it won't be a new thing for many of you. Today, I mean, as they told you, I mean, ERU and POP, let's say, asked me to give a seminar on any topic actually. So because the invitation came from the Economics Research Union, I thought that maybe I should be talking about some things related to economics. But as my IP students know, we cannot like distinguish politics from economics. So it's going to be a combination of the two. So I will be talking about Turkey and China economic relations. But before I start, I would like to thank for the invitation. Even though I'm quite busy, I cannot say no to my students. Therefore, I accepted the invitation. So here, because the title they have given was Türkiye-China. In the title, I used Turkey, but after that, because it's easier to say Turkey, I will switch to Turkey. So this, I mean, I will not be talking too long in case you want to ask questions, because we have something like an hour long time right here. So I will talk something like half an hour and leave the rest for the Q&A if you want to ask questions about this. I think highly important because of the huge trade deficit we have with China. But I don't think, I mean, until recently, the government didn't think it was that problematic. But since a few years, they also consider this as a hugely problematic relationship. Because as we will see, Turkey's trade deficit with China consists of Turkey's 60% of all trade deficit. So it's a huge deficit that we are talking about. So we need to do some things to overcome. So my talk will be based on this article. Some of you, because I made it compulsory to read. Some of my students are reading this article, but this talk, but only a few, like some parts of it, is based on this article that Veysel and I recently published in Turkish Studies. So let me go here. In recent years, many people viewed Turkey-China relations as, or in positive lines, let's say. I mean, a decade ago or so, people thought that this would be a positive relationship and it would contribute to Turkey's position in international relations, in economics, etc. So some people said that recent increasing investment, credit, and trade ties offer like opportunities for Turkey. So they said that, as we'll see later on, for example, China has an initiative that was announced in 2013, the so-called Belt and Road Initiative, offers hope for Turkey because it could increase China's investments in Turkey and it could offer chances for Turkey to export more to China. Unfortunately, it did not happen. Some people say that China is a significant partner in the emerging post-Western international order. So the world is changing. The US-centric international system is under transformation. So either it's going to be a multipolar or multi-centric order according to your approach. So things will change in the end. And China can be Turkey's partner in this newly emerging order, some people claimed. And if you follow news, for example, President Erdogan numerous times talked about Turkey joining Shanghai Cooperation Organization or BRICS and BRICS Plus nowadays. And both of the institutions are led by China. And also some people claim that China contributes to the emergence of a Eurasian form of internationalization in Turkey. So people talked about China model, China's economic model, so Turkey could follow that model. On the other hand, there are some skeptical perspectives because these people say that, or ask the question, how does the AKP's, the government's volatile authoritarianism impact the bilateral engagement? Because according to some people, this authoritarian shift in Turkey, unlike expectations, actually harms Turkey's relations with China. And also, some people talked about what about the unmet expectations from China related to investment, financial flows, tourism, etc. And we will talk about them in detail. So our study actually aimed to contribute this debate or these debates by looking at Turkey's relations with China from bilateral trade relations perspectives. So here we ask two interrelated questions. So what are the underlying dynamics of Turkey's trade deficit with China? So why Turkey consistently and insistently gives trade deficit in its trade relations with China, and this trade deficit is growing year by year. And also the follow-up question asks, does the trade imbalance issue tend to undermine bilateral relations? Because like in many cases, in different cases, such a huge deficit creates troubles between the governments of two countries. So China, in the last 12 years, let's say, or since 2013, is the world's largest trading nation. In 2009, it got the title the world's largest exporting nation, and 4 years later, it got the title the world's largest trading nation, which means that China trades more than the United States in the world. But China's economy is, let's say, 2/3 of the US economy, which means that China is the most important trading nation on earth, and therefore it's a game changer in trade relationships. And this dynamic, let's say, created opportunities for some developing countries because China became an engine of growth for these countries. But the number of countries that can benefit in their trade with China is quite limited. These are either raw materials exporters, especially fossil fuel exporters, or rich mineral exporters, like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, etc., or like the ones that are tied to China's regional or global value chains, like Malaysia, Vietnam, etc. So the countries that export to China more than they import. We are talking about developing countries. In the developed world also, the number of countries that have trade surpluses with China is limited. Germany is one of them, but the majority of countries in the world have trade deficits. And this creates troubles, of course, in their bilateral relations. So for many other developing countries, on the other hand, and this includes Turkey also, China has become an important source of import rather than an export market. And of course, this in the end creates huge trade deficits with China. And these things always become a problem in like China's relations with these countries. So, as I said before, some people thought that when China and Turkey engaged in active relationship in economics, these people thought that China could offer hope for Turkey, especially the introduction of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is the map of Belt and Road, like a simple map, let's say, of this one. So Belt and Road Initiative was announced in October and November of 2013 by the Chinese President Xi Jinping. And so it wants to, let's say, recreate the historical Silk Road, like İpek Yolu, and we also call it Baharat Yolu, the sea lane. So the belt is the let's say land-based roads or links that China creates with Eurasian and later on African partners, and the road part, so belt and road is the maritime Silk Road. So such a huge investment opportunity created for many people the conditions of Turkey's increasing economic relations and the possibility of Turkey exporting more to China, in addition to having more investments from China. And also Turkey has its own initiative. It is called the Middle Corridor Initiative. And this one, in Turkey in Turkey's mind, it is very much aligned with China's Middle Corridor approach to its Belt and Road Initiative. So China has different corridors, the Northern Corridor, Southern Corridor, and the Middle Corridor. And in the Middle Corridor passes through Turkey. And Turkey's own understanding of Middle Corridor Initiative actually wanted to link its understanding to the Chinese BRI. Therefore, Turkey thought that Turkey could benefit from this understanding or initiative very much. And because of that, in the G20 meeting in Turkey and in Antalya, Turkey signed the Belt and Road Memorandum of Understanding with China, as well as Turkey and China aligned their two initiatives, Belt and Road Initiative and the Middle Corridor Initiative, under this also agreement. But this is just a memorandum of understanding, which means that it's like we want to align this kind of a deal. So the deal has not been materialized yet, and it's a problem for Turkey, of course. So some expected as a result that Turkey could increase its export to China. But as you can see from this table, it did not happen actually. So Turkey's exports to China stuck around $3 to $4 billion US. At times it was even lower than that. But when we look at in the last, let's say 10, 12 years, Turkey's exports did not increase, unfortunately, to China. But China's exports almost continuously increase. Yes, there are some drops in 2017, 18, 19, but they are related with Turkey's economic conditions actually. So Turkey's overall imports dropped in those years. But other than that, last year and the year before, so 2013, 2023, and 24, the trade deficit was more than 41 billion US dollars. And because of that, China constitutes 60% of Turkey's trade deficit. It's a huge deficit, and we are not talking about a country that exports natural gas or petroleum to Turkey. So Turkey has a trade deficit with Russia. That's quite understandable because we buy natural gas from Russia. It happens. Saudi Arabia, for example, has a trade surplus in its relations with China because they are exporting petroleum. That is understandable, but this is highly unexpected, especially this much trade deficit. But Turkey is not alone in this. Some other developing countries face the same problem. We will come to this later on again, but here we can see that normally Turkey exports, or maybe we can, okay, let's move on and we will come back to this later on. So here we ask in the article how to make sense of stagnant Turkish export to China and the persistent and indeed widening trade deficit with China. So how should we explain it? What are the reasons, and is there a way of overcoming that problem? So our main argument is that Turkey's trade deficit with China is a structural one. So it's not unique to Turkey, but Turkey doesn't seem to be overcoming it in an easy way. So this structure is rooted in China's position as the world's leading manufacturing and assembly hub, and Turkey's semi-peripheral position. I will talk about them more in the coming slides. So because of that, initiatives like the BRI, the MCI, cannot substantially increase Turkey's exports to China, therefore decrease Turkey's trade deficit with China. So China needs to do more for that. Turkey needs to do more. So since the 1980s, so in the last few decades, as China started to open itself to the outside world, it emerged as the foremost manufacturing hub of the global economy. So in time, Chinese local producers have become globally competitive, especially in low and mid-tech manufacturing. So, and because of that, countries that focus on similar products in producing locally and exporting them, like Turkey, face constraints in their exports to China. So China already produces these goods and with lower costs. Therefore, it's hard for Turkey and similar countries with similar export baskets to sell them these goods to China or enter into the Chinese market. But also, in the last decade or so, China has become the globally largest center of manufacturing and assembly in high-tech sectors as well. So it's not only low and medium technology products, but also high technology products. And there are two reasons for this. First of all, many transnational corporations have shifted their operations to China. We are talking about Apple, Hewlett-Packard, Asus, and many others. Volkswagen, etc., etc. So TNCs operate in China and they export these goods to the outside world. And China is primarily the export or assembly hub for these countries. But also, quite recently, Chinese companies have become innovative as well. So Chinese car companies, for example, EV cars, or electric vehicles or electric cars dominate the market globally. Or many like China brands, the laptop that I'm using, for example, Lenovo is a China brand, and they're also exporting similar items. Therefore, both Chinese companies and global corporations produce and export in China. Therefore, China in recent years have become like center of manufacturing both in low and mid technology and high technology sectors. And as a result, China currently accounts for 35% of world manufacturing and 20% of world manufacturing exports. So 1/5 of all manufactured goods are exported from China to the world. Just 1/5 from one nation. So when we look at Turkey's, also recently some scholars start to talk about the global value chain perspectives. And they say that exports in the case of China, but in cases of others, globally integrated world producers, exports contain imported parts and components from other producers. Which means that China's export statistics are inflated. Which means that the items that are exported from China to the outside world actually contain a high level of imported parts. So Turkey's imports from China contain a substantial portion of indirect imports from leading transnational corporations, as I said before, like HP, Asus, Apple, etc. And according to some scholars who make up the calculations, China's exports to Turkey contain approximately 30% foreign value added. So these are not 100% China-produced goods. Especially in the case of Apple, for example, China is not a production hub, but an assembly hub. So the majority of the value added produced in an iPhone, let's say, is not produced in China. They are actually produced somewhere else, brought to China, assembled in China, and exported to China. In older versions of Apple's, it was writing at the back, like assembled in China. Not produced in China, because the phones are not produced in China, actually. Or the majority of the parts. So this is not only related to China, of course. The items that we export from Turkey to the outside world, like cars, for example, contain this as well. So it's not unique to China. Therefore, someone can say that, what can we about that? But China, we are buying the Chinese products. But it also means that if these TNCs shift their production or assembly lines from China to another country, like Vietnam, for example, then Turkey's trade deficit with China might decrease, but the trade deficit in total will stay the same. So we will buy from Vietnam or India or another country more, actually. So we talked about, we said that our main argument is that this is structural. It is because of China's position as the leading global manufacturing hub and Turkey's semi-peripheral position. So unless Turkey improves its manufacturing capacity and industrial policies, Turkey will maybe overcome the problem with China, but it will face similar trade deficits with other countries. When we look at Turkey's exports basket, we see that Turkey's exports are primarily composed of manufactured goods in low and medium technology products. So motor vehicles, home appliances, iron and steel, and textiles. Or if we go back to this, I put this slide in the wrong place. So here we see that Turkey's largest 5 exports products in 2020, 21, and 22, and it's similar in the last 2 years also. So we sell vehicles, machinery, electrical machinery and equipment, iron and steel, and apparel and clothing. So these are Turkey's primarily exports to the world. But when we look at Turkey's exports to China, here we see that like many of the items that we export to the outside world, we cannot export them to China. So Turkey sells like ore, slag, and ash, salt, silver, earth, and stone, machinery, copper, chemicals, and metals to China. So the basket or export mix changes quite significantly to low value added primarily, and up to a degree mid value added products. And as you export low to mid value added products and import in exchange electrical machinery and equipment, machinery, organic chemicals, optical, photographic, medical instruments, etc., so which are more actually value added, then you have a huge trade deficit. You cannot close the trade deficit by selling more agriculture products, more textile products, etc., to that country. We need to increase our capacity to sell higher value added products. But it's not easy to do, of course. And also, the reason why we cannot sell these goods to China, because China is already much more competitive than Turkey. Right? So we cannot sell them because China produces them for lower prices. Therefore, we cannot enter into the Chinese markets. But as I said before, this is not unique to Turkey. Other countries with similar export baskets, like Brazil, for example, face similar problems. Therefore, only the countries that either exports high value-added products or raw materials or commodities can export more to China than they import. But even those countries are unhappy with this, of course, relationship. So even though some bureaucrats or ministers consider this unequal relationship as a problem in the past, in recent years, the number of people criticizing this deficit increased more and more. And Turkey nowadays considers this trade deficit as a major problem in its relations with China. That's not the only major problem, because I'm not going to go into details of that, but there's this Uyghur issue also, which is a political matter. But in terms of economics or in other matters, this is trade deficit is the major problem, because this is a country that we are giving 60% of our trade deficit to. Therefore, in recent years, Turkish government, in support of different sectors leadership, like business elite, started to put let's say, limitations to China's exports to Turkey. So Turkey started anti-dumping investigations and put additional tariffs on Chinese imports. So for example, Turkey put, even before the European Union, a 40% tariff on cars imported from China. This was initially put on electrical vehicles. Then all cars coming from China were included in the picture or in the tariffs. And there are exceptions to this. If a Chinese company makes an investment in Turkey, then we decrease the tariffs to, depending on the deal, 0 or 5 to minimum. BYD, because of that, can sell Turkey tariff-free, even though they have not made a single investment or like a dollar's worth investment yet. And also, Turkish solar equipment producers are highly eager to protect the Turkish market and producers. And because of that, Turkey has put tariffs on Chinese solar energy equipment. So in 2017, initially, Turkey put anti-dumping tariffs on such goods from China. And 2 years ago, so in 2023, in addition to China, these anti-dumping measures were extended to several third countries like Malaysia, because Chinese corporations make investments in those countries and sell through Malaysia, Indonesia, or other countries. Therefore, as Turkey wanted to strengthen, let's say, its limitations on Chinese imports, Turkey included these countries on its list of tariffs as well. But the thing is, we are currently with Veysel and with Sırma Altun and someone else, we are working on a new, let's say, paper on Turkey's solar panel and solar energy relations with China. But the thing is, Turkey can produce solar panels, but in terms of higher value or higher technology products, Turkey is still reliant on China, like solar cells, etc. So we are continuing to import from China, and China's share is 90%, even though we put these tariffs. Because even when we put tariffs, they are producing much cheaper than either Turkish producers or other producers in the world. In addition to that, some decrees were issued under the prevention of the unfair competition. And with this, additional tariffs were put on Chinese imports across various sectors like construction materials, textiles, baby carriages, air conditioners, auto parts, etc. So Turkey is doing its best to limit its imports from China, but as the table showed, actually we cannot limit them. They are so efficient in producing, and their production costs are so low that even tariffs cannot stop them from exporting to Turkey more and more. So people ask, of course, and we also ask, how can we overcome this problem, right? I mean, there should be a way to overcome the problem. So some people claim that Chinese capital flows could bring balance to this trade deficit. So maybe we cannot lower the trade deficit, but maybe we can lower the total economic relations deficit by increasing investments from China through credits or with tourism. So through services, etc., maybe we can have surplus in this part, and therefore the problem that we are facing with the trade deficit could be eased up to a degree. So currently, Chinese investment in Turkey to be estimated over $5 billion US. When you look at the central bank, Turkey central bank's numbers, it's much lower, but this is the actual amount, because they are only considering greenfield investments, which are like new investments, not like mergers and acquisitions or buying an already existent company. So the most or the largest investments done by China in Turkey are Embahunutlu power plant in Adana, Trendyol, you all use it, I guess, owned by Alibaba, and Kum Port, it's a port in Istanbul. BYD promised to make $1 billion worth of like investment or in Manisa to produce 150,000 cars per year. We are still waiting for the investment to be done. Actually, BYD CEO recently told that, I mean, in quotation marks, we are very efficient and rapid in building factories. We think that we can build it in a year, so we expect it to be completed at the end of 2026, so next year. I'm not sure, but we'll see. So it will provide, let's say, 5,000 jobs to Turkish people, and with the side contributions, Turkey is expecting to have 20,000 new jobs for the Turkish people in or around Manisa. But we'll see if that's going to happen. And as a result of this investment promise, BYD cars are import or tariff-free nowadays. Another important source of contribution from China can be credit flows. By the way, before I skip to this, so $5 billion might seem high to you, but actually it's low. Considering Turkey's relations with, for example, Netherlands or other Western countries who made investments in Turkey, $5 billion is quite low. I mean, it needs to be at least more than 10, maybe 15 billion, so that we can consider China as an important source of investment in Turkey. So in recent years also, the inflow of development financing from Chinese policy banks like China Exim Bank, Export-Import Bank, China Development Bank has been growing. In the last few years, Turkey received over $3.5 billion from China. There are also swap agreements between the two countries. But the thing is, these are tight financing primarily, which means that China is lending support to Turkey to buy products from China back again. So, for example, they are saying that we are providing this to you so that you can update your electricity infrastructure, but you need to buy the products from China. So it's kind of giving credit to help Chinese producers. So it's not so much in favor of Turkey, let's say. And also there's an institution called Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is led by China, but Turkey is one of the founding members. But also Turkey is one of the most active members and recipients of credits from the AIB. And Turkey has taken over $5 billion from the AIB. It's an important source of investment support, let's say, for Turkey, but still, like, this is not for free, actually. And the AIB's interest rates are quite higher than other development banks like Asian Development Bank or, let's say, World Bank. And finally, tourism. Like many people in Turkey in the last 10 or more years hope that Chinese tourists coming to Turkey would increase. Turkey hoped that the number of Chinese tourists would be over 1 million in the year 2020. It didn't happen. But it was on an increasing track previously. So the number of tourists coming from China to Turkey was 410,000 in 2020. But after that, because of COVID, China shut itself down to the outside world, so Chinese tourists did not go abroad. In 2023, the number was approximately something like 280,000. Last year, it increased to 410,000 again. So in 2019, it was approximately 410,000. Again, we are back in the same, let's say, number. But the thing is, last year, 146 million Chinese tourists traveled abroad, and only 400,000 of them came to Turkey. So this is a very, very, very small part of Chinese tourists circulating worldwide. And the best part of having Chinese tourists is that they spend too much money. So before COVID, I did not check the numbers recently, but before COVID, the average amount of money a Chinese spent in Turkey was approximately $3,000 in a week. But the rest, so all tourists from the other parts of the world, spend approximately $700 a week. So Chinese tourists were like highly profitable. I mean, they are, because they spend too much money when they visit the country. So if Turkey can increase the number of Chinese tourists to a few million, then it will contribute to Turkish tourism industry quite a lot. So Turkey needs to invest in this, but it's not easy. So to conclude, so we see that like there's an unfavorable trade relationship between Turkey and China. And this creates an important problem for Turkey. And literature talks about deindustrialization, not only about Turkey, but in general. So because China is increasing its manufacturing capacity and exports to other countries, many countries, including Germany, are under the threat of deindustrialization because of China. Most probably you heard about like news talking about Turkey's textile giants, let's say, leaving Turkey and carrying their production sites to Egypt because of high production costs in Turkey, right? Recently Collins went there. Some others either shut down their production in Turkey or moved their production to Egypt or other places. And recently Abdullah Keely said similar, even though a few years ago he hailed the economic policies of the government. So nowadays they are facing the problem also. So this deindustrialization danger creates a competitive and contentious dynamic in bilateral relations. This is a problem for Turkey, of course. And also, to be able to overcome this, Turkey needs to pursue more active and targeted policies to attract investment and financing from China. So the amount of investment, so over 5 billion, is not enough. As I said before, for us to consider China is an investment source, an important investment source, we need to increase the investment at least to 10, and it will be much better if we can increase it to $15 billion. And the investment should be on higher value-added production. And also, financing from China, like credits, tight credits or not, or also tourism needs to be increased very much. And because of this structural nature that we talked about of the trade deficit, this presents a challenge which is very hard for Turkey to overcome in the short term. And to be able to overcome this problem, we need a longer-term strategy that will focus on an industrial policy to reindustrialize, not but reindustrialize Turkey, especially in mid to high technology sectors, so that we can penetrate into Chinese markets and increase Turkey's position in the global economy. I say and stop here. Thank you. Okay, let's continue then. Yes, Eren.
Since we have a huge trade deficit with China, we are trying to receive investment from Belt and Road Initiative. Is it working, and do you think it will work in the future years for this project to get investment?
It doesn't, it's not working, unfortunately. Yes, the investment has increased since the initiation of the BRI, but if you remember here, I put some investments, right? So power plant, it's the last coal power plant China built outside of China. So it's not an important investment. It's an old technology. Trendyol, they just bought an e-commerce platform. Kumport, they made the investment. They're unhappy with this investment. I think if they can, they could sell actually. So among these ones, only BYD seems to be a proper source of investment. And also, so for example, Huawei is doing some things in Turkey, some investments or other business deals, but the thing is they do not share their technology with Turkey. But if investments do not include knowledge transfers, then they are just in like low quality investments. Therefore, we need to increase that aspect as well.
Do you think in the future years this problem will be solved from China?
I'm not very optimistic, let's say, about that. I mean, Turkey, last year, I guess, we started a program to bring in investment to attract mid to high, let's say, technology investments in Turkey. And Turkey devoted something like $30 billion to that investment program. And some Chinese companies like solar producers, let's say, solar energy producers, are actually making investments, or they are in talks with the government. They will bring in some, but I don't know if we can increase. I mean, I hope we can, but I'm not that optimistic because of Turkey's also economic troubles, and because of the policy that Turkey is following nowadays, like pressuring the US dollar or like foreign currencies increases the cost of production, right? And also because of the high interest rates, it's very hard to take credits for the business people. I mean, it's better to keep the money by investing in other like sources, like gold or credits, etc., rather than making investments in Turkey. Therefore, I'm not optimistic for the short term, but in the long term, we'll see. Because Chery also, there was a talk about Chery to make an investment. One day, President Erdogan said that Chery is going to make an investment in Samsung. The following day, Chery's CEO said that we have no interest in investing in Turkey. So the following day. So it means that there also, I mean, I knew that there were talks between Turkey and Chery, but because of what's happening in Turkey, in the politics realm and in the economics realm, Chinese investors are not that eager anymore, because like capital likes stability. They don't care about democracy, but they care about rule of law in a country and stability in an economy. That's the most important thing. And Chinese are in love with stability, both in their countries and in outside world. So I don't think in the short term. Yes.
Hocam, benim bölgesel bir sorum olacak. Çin'in de Türkiye'nin de bir Afrika açılımı var. Türkiye'nin son 20 senedir artan, yani yavaş yavaş da olsa bir açılım var. Peki burada iki ülkenin birbirine bir konflik yaşayacağı bir durum olabilir mi? Çünkü Çin'in çok fazla bir yatırımı oluyor, limanlar olsun, kurumlarında olsun, belki Somali bölgesinde. Türkiye'nin de bazı yatırımlar var. Belki ama Türkiye'ninki biraz şişirmiş balon mu oluyor, yoksa ikisinin karşılaşacağı bir durumları, durumların orada bir rol kapmaya çalışmaya durumları var.
Shall I answer in English or Turkish? I mean, it's because of the video. In English?
In English.
Okay, so the question was, then maybe I should also translate the question. So Turkey and China have investments in Africa. So will their interests clash? In some places, maybe. I'm not working on China-Africa or Turkey-Africa relations, so I don't follow day-to-day developments. But it's like this is like comparing a heavyweight boxer with a, let's say, slim weight. I don't know how to say it. 2 siklet, our siklet. So Turkey's economy is less than a tenth of Chinese economy. So the possibility of us clashing with China in Africa is quite low. Yes, in Somalia and in a few others, Turkey's presence is strong. So maybe in one or two places we can have problems, but in general I don't think we can compete with them. That's the issue. Even Westerners, like developed countries, cannot compete with China in Africa, either because they have conditional investment opportunities, or they provide conditional investments like transparency, like democracy, etc., which Chinese do not, or Chinese are more eager to, let's say, make investments in more risky places. So, I mean, I did not follow, as I said, both countries' investments in Africa. I have superficial information, but I don't think we can compete. Therefore, I don't think, maybe in exceptional cases we will have problems, but in general, our scale is much smaller than China, so we cannot clash with them. Yes.
You know that in the very big picture there is a trade war between United States and China currently. And United States says that we need to decrease our trade deficit with all our trade partners actually, because we give too much deficit to them. And if they don't decrease it, then I will put some tariffs to them to punish them. That's their new Trump policy. So do you think that Turkey has to choose a side in this trade war, for example, either buy from China or United States? And also, I also wonder that, for example, China is building factory in Turkey, car factories, and I wonder if some European countries might create some trouble about it. For example, like Germany or France, because they are already losing their competitiveness in car manufacturing market, and now they are very close Chinese factories to the European market. So do you think that they might create some trouble? So actually, the main question is that, do we have to choose a side between West and
No, we shouldn't be choosing a side, because choosing a side, either Chinese side or US side, won't be beneficial to us. Because Trump administration is saying that, I mean, they are following, let's say, neo-mercantilist policies, and in that, like, they are not favoring Turkey also. So why should we be favoring the United States? Or in the Chinese case, as we have recently seen, they are not also favoring China. So Turkey should follow policies that would be, or that would maximize its interests as much as possible. But we are a semi-peripheral country with a small capacity of production, and we are a small economy. And we are reliant on the United States for our security. So we are a partner of NATO. Yes, we have a strong army, blah, blah, but we are trying to buy from the United States, right? Or from Westerners, like the air defense systems or like warcrafts, etc. Because we cannot buy from China or Russia, or even, or when we buy, we have troubles. But China is an important source of intermediate goods also for Turkey. So we need to buy some things from China so that we can use those goods, intermediate goods, to produce the final product to sell to Western markets. So a better policy would be to benefit as much as possible from both sides by following a carefully planned policy. For the other one, I mean, yes, no country is happy with Chinese manufacturing capacity overtaking their own capacity, right? But for example, Volkswagen or Tesla, these car companies, or Renault, they have investments in China. So they cannot force us or force other European countries to shut down the factories, because then China could do the same thing. In the past, China used to learn from them. In the electrical vehicles, Chinese are the ones who are teaching. They are not learning from the West anymore. They already learned, they acquired the information that they need to acquire. And also, BYD was considering the investment in two countries. One of them was Turkey, and the other one was Spain. So Chinese companies are making investments in Spain, in Hungary, in other places as well. So Europeans also want them to make investments. Maybe not the car production, but battery production, etc. So this is, I mean, this is a highly integrated, globalized world. Yes, there are some frictions, like trade wars, etc. But still, you cannot like totally decouple economies from each other. It's possible. We have seen this in the last decade, let's say, since the first Trump administration. The United States is trying to do it. China is trying to do it also at the same time, but they are not successful because it's already too much integrated into each other. So we are talking about the global value chains. They are not like national value chains anymore. So I don't think EU can pressure us on that.
Can I ask one more
Yes, yes.
last question? At the beginning of the presentation, you said that increasing authoritarianism in Turkey actually had a bad effect between the China and Turkey relationship. But as far as I remember, you didn't clarify it. I wonder why it has a bad.
So it's like that was. So I was presenting some perspectives. Never mind. From the literature. But some literature states that maybe it's better if you read the paper. But because of the corrupt nature of the system in Turkey, Chinese companies, even Chinese companies, do not want to make business with Turkey. This is like paper was written after a detailed case study research. I mean, I know the authors because they were both my supervisors previously during my PhD, and they say that because of this problem in Turkey, China stopped making investments in Turkish ports, but they are preferring other ports like the Israel ports, the Greece ports, etc. So because China always like to deal with the governments, they don't talk to like opposition figures, etc. But they don't want to be sidelined because of, let's say, predatory practices of domestic elite. The article is saying, I'm not saying, to clarify, I don't want to be in trouble in this country. Any other questions? No questions? Then we can complete the session. Thank you very much, arkadaşlar.